thank you very much. And yes, so you heard from the previous speaker about all the exciting drugs that are coming along. And as he mentioned, one of the most important things is you've actually got to manufacture them. And you've got to manufacture them reproducibly. You want to manufacture them on time so that every patient can be supplied every time. And of course, we are all in business. So you want to make sure that when you're manufacturing materials, you're not throwing stuff away, you're not making mistakes, that your supply chain is well organized and you know where things are going. Now, in our world, one of the biggest obstructions to doing that are us. Unfortunately, it's the human being. Why? Because human beings tend to make mistakes. We don't come into work every day going, today I'm going to make a mistake, hopefully. Otherwise, your quality culture may not be quite right. But what digital is trying to do, as we know, is to use the power of automation, of the computers that we now have, of the technology that's ever increasing, to take advantage of what humans can do, which is use the old brain, is to think. Although, of course, eventually will be replaced by artificial intelligence, but that's quite a way away. But what are we doing in the bioprocessing world to enable bringing in the digital era to make manufacturing better, to make our medicines quicker, to make them cheaper and get them out to patients in a much more efficient way? And the thing is that there are many new molecules that are out there, and they're very innovative and they're very different. And it's getting to the point where manufacturing is getting extremely complex. And the more you can introduce digital and automation and the other tools that are out there, the more successful you're going to be, particularly because our molecules are getting more and more expensive to make. Many of you who may know that, in the small molecule world, that in order to make a small molecule and a batch of that doesn't tend to be that expensive. The raw materials don't tend to be that expensive, a lot of it's chemical synthesis. But if you compare that to, say, a biological product, you are talking millions and millions of dollars per batch. And if something goes wrong with that, that's a lot of money that goes down the drain. So, and that's only going to get worse with more and more sophisticated molecules that we're getting. So how do we work today? And so here is a factory that we currently work in. Now, as we heard, there's lots of paper that floats around in our factories still to this day. Lots of pieces of paper to fill in, lots of forms to fill in. And when you're doing that, people start making mistakes. There's not always the ability to see all your data in real time. At the end of the day, what is QC there for? They're there to test the product prior to release. Well, guess what? If something's gone wrong during your process and you're in the QC lab, it's kind of too late. You can't go back and tell cells to make something better because you've detected it too late in the laboratory. How do you get more data in real time? You've heard some talks during the conference about PAT and online testing. How can we move data back to where it really needs to be seen so we may be able to correct things or throw things away very early in the stage of manufacturing so that we don't waste all that money of getting through to the end? There is a lot of repetitive work that people do when they're on the floor, when they're in the labs, when they're in quality, when they're in multiple different places. As I say, a lot of paperwork, a lot of stuff that's very repetitive. And humans, when you do something repetitive, is a place where you tend to make mistakes. If you watch somebody filling in forms where they're writing a 16-digit lot number multiple times, guess what? There's probably a big chance that somewhere they're going to make a mistake on typing or even writing that digital number over and over again. How can a machine remove that? Supply chain. Now, many of you may not be interested in supply chain, but we actually have to have one. People have to know, where are you when you're moving your drug from drug substance to drug product, to then packaging it, to then getting it to distribution, then getting it out to patients? How do you know where your product is? And of course, if it's a cold chain product, what temperature is it at? And how can you monitor what's going where? We don't have great systems at the moment that help us see where our product is moving, but they're definitely changing over time. I mentioned paper-based instructions. How do many of us learn? Through SOPs. Do you really learn when you're reading a 10 to 15 page SOP, you then read and sign it and go, yeah, well, I know that now. But is that true? I think the answer is probably not. So we've long had the discussion in our business of what does training actually mean? what does learning actually mean? And when do you need to be having that procedure in your hands? Because any of you who've had an inspector coming from the regulatory agencies, they want to know whether you're actually following your procedures. So what do you do from memory and what do you do following paper? And again, I think as an industry, we haven't quite got that balance quite right yet. As I mentioned, lack of visibility of goods movements. There's a link to the supply chain. What's gone where? What temperature is it? Where is it? How many of those things have we had? How much has actually gone to a pharmacy? How much is in the patient's hands? That's all changing now with a lot of the apps that you can get, where a patient is actually monitored for when they take their drug. Because we heard from the previous speaker, compliance of taking medicines is shockingly bad. When you see the data on how many patients actually take their drug when they're supposed to, or even take their drug, it's really low. And then you wonder why our clinical trials may sometimes fail, because maybe half the time the patients aren't doing what you're telling them to do. And then when you go to a doctor and the doctor says, oh dear, that drug doesn't seem to be working, do you actually say, well, I forgot to take it? And they swap you to something else. It is amazing when you see the figures about how bad patients are about taking that stuff. And of course, so health and safety, when we have an issue, it's really complex trying to get reports out to actually identify why was it that somebody maybe hurt themselves or tripped up or whatever. And you'll see there's digital solutions to even that. So I'm going to flick through these so they're all in one. So what are we doing now to make a difference? So we are going to be moving to the future. Well, first thing is real-time data. To actually see what is happening, and we've seen some talks about that, I say, of inline technology, where you're measuring exactly what the chemical synthesis is doing, or if you're making a biologic, what glycosylation is going on, whether there are aggregates in the protein, what's happening with oxygen and acidic variants in your protein, all that sort of stuff is starting to happen online. So you can tell exactly what's going on during manufacturing rather than waiting till the end. Automation and robots, they're happening everywhere. Can they replace those repetitive tasks that we're doing? For instance, putting things in cartons. Why do you need a human to be doing that? There may be the chance they forget to put something in the carton, forget to put the leaflet in. Well, there's robots now that do all that stuff, and much more. Visualized end-to-end value chains. So again, that's where you have, basically, in an office, you can actually see where all your product is. Around the country, in distributors and all that stuff at a push of a button. I mean, it's amazing what you can do now in supply chain, see exactly where things are going and also where the need is. Somebody who wants to buy your drug says, I need 20 packets of this. They can push a button and all of a sudden it pops up and you know that you have to distribute material to it. And here's an interesting one, wearable and mobile tools to use. And I'll introduce you to a couple of those where people are using headsets and those Google-type glasses to help you with what you need to do in manufacturing, that guide you, virtual reality, that type of stuff. And then cognitive computing, what's all that about? Well, that's actually where a computer looks at something and can tell you whether it's in the right place or not. So I'll give you an example of that. So if people are moving things around on the line, particularly in a packing line, there's stuff that they may have to reject. So they see something on the line, they'll look at it and they go, well, something's not quite right. I'm going to put it in the reject bin. Well, there's more than one bin on a line. There's the reject bin, there's a rework bin, which says, oh, I can look at that and then I can rework it. Maybe I'll put it back in the package. A computer can actually, through a video, watch what the operator's doing. And if they put the wrong thing in the wrong bin, it can send an alert. Or it can say, oh, you know what? There's something behind you that shouldn't be behind you. You're about to walk into something, and it will send an alert. So it can be a safety issue as well. It is incredible what computers can do now through video to monitor what's going on in the working environment. So what is the ultimate vision of where we want to be? Well, we call it the lights out facility. So ironically, to have no humans in the factory at all. And interestingly, the pharmaceutical industry is way behind other industries. I'm sure you've seen, videos of, car factories and silicon chip factories where basically there's nobody on the floor anymore. It's all robots moving stuff around. It's robots doing all the work. Well, that would be great if we can do that in the pharmaceutical arena, because the more human interaction you have, the more chance something can go wrong. 100% right first time. Robots tend not to make mistakes. Humans do. Every lot you make is a lot you want to get out the door. You don't want to be reworking. You don't want scrap. You don't want to have a deviation. For those of you who work in manufacturing or quality, the number one reason why you have to have large inventory and stock is because you can't guarantee that when you start something on Monday and you tell supply chain it's going to be finished on Friday, it's actually finished on Friday. Because you may have a deviation, and a deviation means you've got to do an investigation. And when you're doing an investigation, that could take a week, it could take 2 days, it could take 3 months. You never know. So even to have a demand-driven supply chain so you can get stuff to patients when they need it every time, you want to get 100% right first time. Process robustness, with all this online measurement, wouldn't it be great to be able to tinker with the process depending on what's actually going on in it, rather than waiting to the end, as I said, in QC to find out something's not quite right. Digital workforce. So this is where, again, it's 100% of employees that understand digital. I doubt you're ever going to completely get rid of people on the floor in the world that we live in. But you need people that are going to understand all this new technology, that are going to understand computers, they're going to understand, for instance, the big data analysis that is now going on, and there's several talks about that in the meeting too. Our workforce is changing. I mean, they always say, look at the computing power of our iPhones compared to the things we used to have. It's absolutely incredible, and we have to keep up with that technology. You know, I mean, we've got to go from when you had the mobile phone that was the size of a brick to an iPhone and the old days of the flip phone. We've all got to move with that, move with the times, and there's a changing generation that's got to do that. And then, as I mentioned, no scrap and minimalized loss. As I said, for instance, if you're making a monoclonal and that batch gets contaminated, that could be millions of dollars that you've just thrown down the drain. Or if something has gone wrong, somebody's turned the dial in the wrong way and it hasn't grown properly, who the hell knows what happens there? So this can make a huge difference to how we operate in the future. So what things are out there? Well, the first thing is, instead of having a stack of 150 pages of instructions in a batch record, which is how people manufacture stuff these days, there's now electronic versions of that. So instead of working with paper, you're working on the computer. Now, what is interesting is, instead of having to sign 500 times in paper, if you do a bad job and just take that and make it into an electronic version, you're still signing 500 times, but now you're typing it in with your username and your password. Doesn't help anybody. So simplifying before you make electronic is the watchword for that. But look at the right first time. So a couple of plants that we've done that in, it's gone from 79% to 95%. And as I said, if you're not right first time, what does that mean? Wrong first time. And those are deviations, those are errors that quality has to catch and all that sort of stuff. So we have something called Discoverant. Now that is taking all the data from our manufacturing processes in real time and analyzing it, looking for trending, seeing if something's going down or going up in the wrong way that it shouldn't be, and it will immediately alert you. So it's real time using artificial intelligence to help you modify your process before something goes wrong. And therefore you should be able to predict the quality. You should be able to release product the minute it comes out of manufacturing without even having to go through the QC lab, because you know exactly what the quality is going to be like because of all this work you do up front, the true PAT, quality by design concept. So here's an example of turning paper into this thing called PASX. It's an electronic batch record system. And you can see, for quality, for my folks, a lot of people think quality is all about pieces of paper, reviewing bits of paper and all that stuff. Well, a lot of it is. But we're moving away from that now because I want quality people to use this. Not just sit in there checking loads of paper as they've signed it right, is the data in the right place and all that stuff. So we reduced batch record review by 50%. That's 50% non-value added work that quality people can now spend on doing other things, like helping with investigations, coaching and mentoring, doing continuous improvement, that sort of stuff. And documentation errors essentially kind of disappeared overnight, which was fantastic. So that's just one thing of changing one type of form into electronic version that's made a huge difference. So this was this artificial intelligence video analytics I was telling you about. So human error is the biggest cause of deviations. So what we have now is cameras that can tell you where a person is, what they're doing, and what they should be doing. So through artificial intelligence, you can take a camera with this system, and it will monitor the person moving around the plant at the various stages of manufacturing, and it will show the machine what you should be doing if you get it right. It can then monitor, once it's learned all that, is the person in the right place at the right time when they're doing manufacturing? Or are they in the wrong place, pushing the wrong button? An alarm will come on. As you see these different buckets, a yellow one and a red one. Did they put the wrong thing in the wrong bucket? Again, the machine will tell you this was a reject, it should go in the red bucket. The video camera will tell the computer, did he put it in the red bucket or not? So it's amazing what technology is out there that can essentially follow us around and see if we're doing the right thing or not. Robots and automation, well, not surprisingly, here's a robot that literally moves boxes. But it can move boxes a lot quicker than a human can, and it doesn't have the issues of having safety issues of continuously lifting things up and moving them around. Robots don't sleep, robots don't need breaks, and they can work 24/7. And they tend to get things right every single time. And then we've got these things called bots, which are sort of computerized systems that can do small tasks that are very repetitive, but can do them automatically. So for instance, we have a bot where when we get a complaint from a supplier, they have to fill in a form with what the lot number was, what the product was, and then write what the complaint actually is. We now have a bot that, instead of a human typing all that stuff in from the complaint we got into our complaint system, it reads all that. It can recognize a lot number, and it just puts it into the system. It recognizes a product name, takes that, puts it in the system. It can even do a bit of text analysis to say what is the complaint and put it in the system. So it's things like that that take away that repetitiveness from the human work and, of course, removes human error. And then this thing about real-time visualization is, as I mentioned, it's around these dashboards, electronic dashboards now that can tell you exactly where materials are during manufacturing, where they are in the plant, where raw materials are in the warehouse and all that stuff. And then, of course, once it gets out to distributors and, as I say, to pharmacies and patients. So you can see your whole supply chain. And this is a great one for us quality people, is you don't realize how hard it is to release a batch. How many hundreds and hundreds of bits of paper and bits of data you have to look at as a quality professional to release a batch. All the QC stuff, all the in-process control stuff, all the release of the materials that you used, all that type of data has to be looked at in separate systems, by the way, so the poor quality person's looking all over the place. Well, now you can do it all in one, because we've linked to a single view, we call it the cockpit, like a pilot, all those systems. So the LIMS system for the lab is connected to this, and it will tell this system if everything's met specification. You get a green light. It tells you from in-process controls, from the batch record, has everything met its in-process controls? If it's green, you get a green light. So by the time the quality person calls this thing up in the morning, if everything's green, they just have to push a release button. One day, we hope the regulators will actually allow the computer to release the batch. We're not there yet, but this is all computerized. As I say, computers tend not to make mistakes. Humans do, by looking through thousands of bits of paper and trying to pull all this information together. So even for that, we're making huge strides in being able to do what we want to do much easier. I mentioned this wearable, mobile, cognitive computing stuff. So virtual reality, we heard so much of what we do now are parenterals, injections, of course being made sterilely. How do you train somebody to go into a sterile facility and do their job? You don't really want them fiddling around in a sterile facility, learning what they're doing, because you can imagine what would happen if you make a mistake. So we spend a lot of money in industry of making mock-ups, wooden versions of things, getting people being watched how they do stuff. Now it's all virtual reality, where literally you can create with these glasses the whole of the internal part of your sterile suite. And it's also being monitored by all this artificial intelligence that will tell you if you touch something in the wrong place, or you were moving too quickly, or you weren't doing the appropriate type of handling that you should be trained on. So it takes all the risk away of having somebody going into a sterile suite to practice or be very junior in what they need to do. So IoT is called Internet of Things, and it covers a whole load of stuff, but it's really how you connect to the internet, which sends data backwards and forwards. So it's a bit like the Alexa in your living room, if you have one. That's Internet of Things, because you could say, Alexa, please order me 10 boxes of cookies if you want to do that. Or even better, it is connected to your fridge. And we have fridges these days that know what's in them, and when you start running out, it sends a message off to the grocery store to order them. Well, you have very similar things with us. If you're in the lab and you're running out of a reagent, we have these shelves that have, it's a bit like when you're in a hotel room, it has sensors to say whether a bottle is there. As soon as you take a bottle away, if you're down to one left, it automatically sends an email to the supplier to order another one. So this Internet of Things is everywhere too. And as I mentioned, this thing about cognitive computing, I'll show another example, but there you have a person who's working in a plant, and behind him is something that he could back into and trip over. But there's a video monitor monitoring all that, and if the person steps back, all of a sudden an alarm will go on and warn them that they're about to trip over something. So a lot of power is now out there that's quite amazing as to what it can do. So one of the things you do not want in our industry is a product mix-up. And these things happen. You see them on the FDA website, recalls and stuff, where people have put the wrong thing in the wrong bottle, or the wrong thing in the wrong syringe, or the wrong syringe in the wrong packet. And it happens because packing lines are complex, and you've got humans involved, as I mentioned. And one of the biggest things is not clearing the line properly between one lot to the next lot. It sounds easy, but it isn't. If you've actually seen a packing line, there are little nooks and crannies all over the place where product can hide, and people can miss stuff because, as I said, they're human beings. So in order to, at present, to do line clearance, guess what? They have a procedure. They're holding an SOP that says, go to machine number 1, open the lid, check in there what you're doing, move to the next one. And so you're reading this thing, you're trying to do it, you're lifting things up. People make mistakes when you're trying to read something and do something. Now, because we actually learned, would you believe, from Amazon, they now have wearables. So the wearable, you put it on and it goes, are you John Smith? And you go, yes, I'm John Smith. It will recognize your voice and automatically sign you in as the right person into the batch record. And it'll say, go to machine number 1, and there's a number 1 on the machine. It'll say, open the lid and check for this, that, and the other in these corners. And then it'll say, did you do it? And you will say, yes. That gets linked into the batch record. So you've removed the issue of having an SOP and a form and trying to do the job at the same time. And this has made a huge difference to the ability to A, clear the line properly, and B, obviously for the workers, because they enjoy it much easier, they do a much better job, and they're not filling in forms and carrying around bits of paper. Made a huge difference to the way we do things. Oops. And here's, was there another one? Oh yeah, this was the virtual reality, as I mentioned, around the training, is you don't have somebody going to sterile suite anymore. There they are with their glasses on, and they're working through what they're doing. But beyond that, here's actually somebody designing the manufacturing floor. By putting all this virtual reality stuff on, they can walk around into the plant and they can say, oh God, if I left that pipe there, it's going to be in the middle of something. Or maybe if I turn that machine slightly, there's going to be more room to get access to something. I mean, who knows what? There's all this type of stuff that you can do. And this is, again, that cognitive computing, not just about safety walking over something. But here we make these respials, and some of you may not know that. This blow-fill seal is a way of putting in drug into a plastic material that is then automatically sealed by these machines. And they're used for respials for things like asthma and stuff like that. These machines make millions and millions of these respials. So when you're doing a media fill for this, because they are sterile, the number of respials you have to do for a media fill is enormous. It's much bigger than anything from vials or syringes that we do in most biologics. Well, you can imagine some microbiologist is going to have to sit there and look continuously at hundreds and hundreds of these things for contamination. And it takes forever. You can see 88 days it can take to look at these things. Now you can have a computer to do it. So again, and by the way, they can be made much more sensitive than the human eye to turbidity or not. And if you're looking at, look at that, you're looking at 10 of those, like this, for hours on end, wouldn't you and I both kind of go a bit blind to what you're seeing after a point, and who knows what you might miss? Computers don't do that. And at the end of the day, this is applicable to anything we do. So here we have the lab, and you can see that in each one of those places, those things I talked about are equally applicable. And it may not just be the laboratory, it may not just be manufacturing, it may be any of the roles that we do. In development, in pharmaceutical development, you need to use data and you need to get there. So you can just look around at all the things that you can apply in the labs that you could do in R&D labs, as an example. Robots, get rid of paper forms, remove manual transcriptions, get online testing with Near-IR and that sort of stuff. So a lot that's out there that's going to make a big difference to us moving forward. So for the pharmaceutical industry, everything is always a bit big and heavy to move because of our regulations and everything else, but we're having a lot of these discussions with the regulators to get us where we need to be, and I think it will make a big difference for us to get every patient every time. So thank you very much.